I wasn't supposed to stay that night. That part was clear long before the evening arrived. Plans had been made. Goodbyes had already been rehearsed in my head. I remember saying it earlier in the day, out loud, as if saying it would lock it in. I would leave. Not angrily, not emotionally, just leave. At the time, it felt settled, like something already behind me. But when the night came, nothing pushed me toward the door. There was no argument to end things sharply, no deadline ticking loudly in the background, no reason that felt important enough to interrupt the calm. The room was quiet, familiar. I told myself that staying one more night wouldn't change anything, that leaving in the morning would feel the same as leaving then. That thought felt reasonable, comforting. It's easy to trust thoughts that don't demand effort. I remember standing there for a moment, not moving, letting the night continue without making a decision. That's how it happened. Not as a choice, as a delay. I stayed because nothing told me not to. And that's what makes this story hard to explain. Because sometimes the mistake isn't what you do, it's what you don't interrupt. There was no sense of urgency that night. If anything, everything felt slower than usual. The kind of slow that makes you believe time is generous. I looked around the space and felt how familiar it had become. The way sounds settled. The way silence didn't feel empty anymore. Familiarity can be deceptive. It convinces you that things are stable simply because they're known. I told myself that staying didn't mean committing, that it was just a pause before the end I had already decided on. Pauses feel harmless. They don't demand explanations, they don't create conflict. They just extend things quietly. I didn't pack anything. I didn't move anything. I just didn't leave. And that felt different from choosing to stay. It felt passive, neutral. I remember thinking that comfort was a good sign, that if something were wrong, it would feel wrong. But comfort isn't always reassurance. Sometimes it's just the absence of friction. And friction is often the only thing that pushes us out of places we shouldn't remain. That night, there was none. So I let the hours pass. I let the night end without closing anything. I went to sleep believing that the morning would reset everything, believing that leaving later would be easier than leaving then. That belief lasted just long enough to matter. That extra night passed quietly. Too quietly to feel important. Nothing about it stood out as different from the nights before. We ate without rushing. We talked about ordinary things that didn't need conclusions. There was no moment where someone asked me to stay longer. That's what made it easy. When nobody asks, you don't feel like you're agreeing to anything. The night ended the way calm nights usually do, without a clear edge. When I woke up the next morning, I noticed how natural it felt to still be there. That should have unsettled me. Instead, it reassured me. The room looked the same in daylight. Familiar, unthreatening. I told myself that leaving later would be simple, that the delay hadn't changed the meaning of anything. So I stayed through the morning, then through the afternoon. By the time evening arrived again, staying another night felt less like a decision and more like a continuation. I didn't label it. I didn't say it out loud. I just let it happen. That's how routines form. Not through intention, but through repetition that goes unnoticed. I stopped thinking of nights as individual units. They blurred together. Once that happens, it becomes harder to point to the moment where something shifted. because nothing dramatic ever did. I remember realizing that I had stopped checking the time before sleeping. I no longer counted how many nights I had stayed. I counted how many times I had almost left. That number grew quietly. The language changed before I noticed it. Not in big ways, in small, casual ones. People stopped asking if I would be around. They spoke as if I already was. Plans were mentioned without checking my availability. Details were discussed as though my presence had been confirmed somewhere else. At first, I corrected them internally. I didn't say that. This isn't permanent. But I didn't say those things out loud. Out loud, I nodded. I adjusted. Not because I felt pressured, because it felt easier than interrupting the flow. That's how assumptions settle in. They don't arrive loudly. They arrive because you don't challenge them early. I noticed how the space began to reflect my presence. Small signs. An extra place set without comment. My routine accounted for without discussion. Those details weren't meant to trap me. They were meant to be accommodating. And accommodation can feel flattering if you don't look too closely. I told myself that this didn't mean anything yet. That acknowledgement wasn't the same as expectation. But the difference between those two is thinner than we like to believe. The more natural my presence became, the harder it felt to imagine leaving. Not because leaving would cause conflict, but because it would require explanation. Explanations create moments you can't glide past. They demand clarity, and clarity would have forced me to admit that I had let things go on longer than I intended. That realization sat with me quietly. I didn't feel trapped. I felt settled into something I hadn't chosen. And once that feeling arrived, I understood that staying one night longer had already changed the shape of everything. There was a point when I realized what was happening. Not all at once, not with clarity. More like a slow recognition that arrived without urgency. I noticed it during a conversation that had nothing to do with me. People were talking about plans, future plans, and my name came up naturally. Not as a question, not as a suggestion, just as part of the arrangement. No one looked at me when they said it, no one waited for my response. They moved on, assuming the detail was settled. That assumption landed quietly. I felt it register in my body before it reached my thoughts. A small tightening, a brief pause in my breathing. This was the moment I could have named it. I could have said something simple, something accurate, something like, "I'm not sure how long I'll be here," or "I hadn't planned on staying." I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need to justify anything. Just naming it would have been enough. But naming things change them. Once you name something, it demands attention, and I wasn't ready for that attention. So I stayed silent. I let the conversation move forward without correcting it. That silence did what silence always does. It filled itself. In the absence of clarification, people wrote their own version of the situation, and their version included me. I remember thinking that I had missed the clean moment to speak, that now saying something would feel abrupt, out of sync. I told myself I would wait for a better opportunity, but opportunities don't improve with time. They fade. By the time I seriously considered leaving again, the situation had a shape. Not a rigid one, but a recognizable one. People expected me to be there. Not aggressively, not demandingly, just comfortably. My presence had been integrated. Schedules bend around it. Small choices accounted for it. Leaving wouldn't have caused chaos, but it would have required recalibration. And recalibration creates friction. I imagined the conversations that would follow, the explanations, the questions that weren't accusations but still needed answers. Why now? What changed? Is everything okay? Those questions felt heavier than staying. Staying required nothing new. Leaving required words, and words have consequences. I realized something uncomfortable then. I wasn't staying because I wanted to. I was staying because leaving would disturb the calm. That calm had become the reason. I adjusted again, not consciously, just enough to make things smoother. I moved my belongings slightly. I settled into routines that no longer felt temporary. Each small adjustment made the idea of leaving feel more abstract, more distant. I stopped thinking in terms of when I go. I started thinking in terms of if. That shift frightened me more than anything else so far, because it meant the extra night had already done its work. It had transformed a choice into a pattern, and patterns are harder to break than decisions. I understood then that staying one night longer hadn't extended the situation. It had changed my relationship to it, and that change was quiet enough to go unnoticed. Until it wasn't. The shift didn't happen all at once. It wasn't marked by a single conversation or a clear decision. It showed up in small adjustments that accumulated over time. I noticed it in how my mornings started. I woke up already aware of other people's schedules, already thinking about what needed to happen before I had even decided what I wanted. That awareness felt normal at first. Then it started to feel constant. I stopped feeling like a guest, but I didn't feel like I belonged either. I existed somewhere in between. That in-between space required effort. I became careful about my movements, my timing, the way I spoke about the future. I avoided phrases that implied certainty. I avoided phrases that implied departure. I stayed vague. Vagueness kept things smooth, and smoothness became the goal. I remember realizing that I was spending more energy maintaining calm than I would have spent leaving. That realization didn't push me to act. It just sat there, waiting. I adjusted again. I accepted things I hadn't planned to accept. I delayed things I had once felt sure about. None of it felt dramatic enough to resist. And that's what allowed it to continue. I don't remember the exact moment I left. That surprises me now. I remember many moments from that time. Small details, fragments of conversations. But the departure itself didn't announce itself. It happened the way everything else had happened, quietly. There was no argument, no emotional conversation that wrapped things up cleanly. I simply reached a point where staying no longer felt neutral, where the calm I had been protecting began to feel heavier than the disruption I was avoiding. So I left. Not abruptly, not dramatically. I gathered my things in the same careful way I had been living. I said goodbye without making it final. No promises, no explanations, just a departure that didn't try to justify itself. That kind of leaving doesn't feel satisfying. There's no sense of completion, but it does leave space. Space to notice what changed. Afterward, I realized how much the extra night had taken from me. Not time, clarity. I had traded clarity for comfort, and comfort had slowly rewritten my intentions. Since then, I pay more attention to delays, to pauses that feel harmless, to nights that stretch without resistance. Because sometimes staying one night longer doesn't trap you. It just teaches you how easily your life can drift without your consent. And some lessons don't arrive loudly. They arrive the way this one did, after everyone sleeps.